think it's, let's call the meeting to order. And Kate, if you could please call the roll.
Maria Ryan.
Here.
Bart Bartles. Morgan Johnston.
Here.
Todd Rusk. Andrew Stumpf.
Here.
Rachel Valenga.
Here.
Stephen Wald.
Thank you. It looks like we have a quorum this evening, and Bart was absent because of work obligation this evening. I learned just a few minutes before the meeting that our Kevin Borgia, our presenter this evening, was not able to make it out of Chicago in a timely manner to get here. So we will likely be hearing from him in March. So are there any other changes to the agenda this evening? All right. Let's move to approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve. I can second.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? All right. Those are approved. And let's move on to public input. Are there members of the public who would like to address us this evening? If you could step forward and just let us know your name and your address, or at least the city that you live in. And
certainly, my name is Jerry Stonecipher. I live in Champaign currently. I've lived in Urbana in the past. I come here tonight to make sure you're all aware of Citizen Climate Lobby. It's a group that I joined a couple of months ago. Their goal is to get national legislation to put a fee on carbon and pay the income from that fee back to all citizens of the United States. So it's a revenue neutral fee. The idea is that it actually will create jobs, and because it's an escalating fee, it encourages people to move away from fossil fuels and to alternative fuels. It's kind of a reverse incentive. It's a group that started about 5 years ago. They are up to about 12,000 people, I believe, at this point, nationally. They're looking to start chapters in every representative's district so that we can have some direct input. We're not really interested in being confrontational. We want to provide assistance to everybody that's involved, try and point out the advantages of this type of an approach, answer any questions, do research, whatever we have to help have that in front of in their consciousness when we get to the point where we have to do something. I think we all agree that something's going to have to be done at some point here. Probably sooner would be better rather than waiting. But that may not be the political process. And so last year, I believe we had like 600 meetings on Capitol Hill with various representatives, maybe not the congressman or senator, but some of their staff. In some cases, we did meet with some congressional people. We intend to continue that relationship going forward. I realize that you're not focused on the national issues, but some of you may have interest, and I am sure that you have other acquaintances that may also have some interest in that. I've been aware of this notion of a carbon fee for about 5 years. I first found out about it on the Carbon Tax Center. And they present it quite eloquently, and they cover a lot of the relationships that go on and how it's beneficial, but they didn't have any action associated with their ideas. And when I found Citizens Climate Lobby, that's their focus, is to get that concept across to as many people as we can, both our representatives, the media, as well as the public. And I'm currently trying to put together a chapter here in the Champaign-Urbana area.
Oh, that's a very good point. You might want to, if you don't mind being seated and speaking into the microphone. And then that way, folks who are watching on TV can also hear the message. Sorry about that.
I didn't realize.
Good point.
In any case, the idea was quite quite obvious to me. I'm an engineer, that this would have a big impact on our fossil fuel usage, and that over the period of 10, 15 years, we would have a dramatic impact just by implementing this. Excuse me. The other feature that we mentioned as part of this is a border adjustment, so that products that are imported into the United States that have significant energy content in them, but are not coming from countries where they have some kind of a fee or other program to encourage conservation, there's actually a fee added at the border when it comes in. That makes sure that American companies are still competitive. The same thing in reverse when it's going out. If it's going out to a country that does not have a tax associated with it, then they're rebated that money so that their products are competitive on export. I would be happy to get some of my more experienced colleagues from Chicago to come down at some point when it would be convenient for you folks, if you wanted a more formal presentation of the range of subjects that we touch on, as well as how we think we can go forward and develop this consensus to move us towards a more sustainable economy.
I think that would actually be very much of interest. We typically have a 5-minute time limit on public input, but if you have more that you'd like to tell us, we can always, give you a few more minutes if you have.
Well, the reason I say that is this is the first public meeting I've had with anybody,
Okay.
and the first time I've tried to present anything for CCL. We had a meeting here in town, when was that, Scott? I was going to say about 2 months ago, before Christmas. And we had several people down from the Chicago group that put on a little bit longer discussion. I took the time to print out a note sheet here, which I'd be happy to give you copies of. It has my contact information, some of the highlights of CCL. If anyone is interested, they have a very good website, and they also have what they call University, Citizens Climate Lobby University, where they present their approach to dealing with various aspects of society, whether it be elected or your neighbor, or even people who come at it from a different direction. Again, I'm not a very confrontational person. I couldn't feel comfortable in that kind of a situation where I was out there yelling at people and trying to call them names. I don't think that's going to create any progress on the situation. You have to change people's understanding of the impact of something like this, and how it's a minimal impact on the economy because you're giving all that money back.
I apologize for interrupting, but we do need to take just kind of a formal poll to give you a few extra minutes. Is there a motion to allow additional time for the speaker?
So motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second, especially since our agenda
Is-
has already been
This is
slightly
true.
modified. Since we have the time today.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. Those opposed? Great. Continue, please.
All right. How would, is there any interest in having a bigger group come down from Chicago, or several people?
I think that it's a good idea to share the information about the types of sustainability advocacy groups and programs that are available for our community. And so I would recommend that we do share that information. I guess I don't know a whole lot about your particular group, and I'm kind of new to the Sustainability Advisory Commission, so that's my opinion.
Are there other comments or questions for our speaker?
So you said it's a national organization.
Yes, sir.
It sounds like there's a chapter in Chicago.
There are several chapters in Chicago.
Okay.
Um,
Any others around the state?
I'm not sure in Illinois. I know that
Okay.
we just had a regional meeting that I attended last fall.
Mm-hmm.
There were people from Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio that came to our meeting. It was just south of Chicago in the fall, about 125 people in the region that actually came to the meeting. I mean, the groups are of various sizes, the chapters are of various sizes. They provide every Wednesday night, I believe it's at 8 p.m. I mentioned it in my notes here. There's a newcomers or an introductory phone call that you can call into and log in so you can get some kind of a presentation. Then on the first Saturday of every month, they also have a national call that you can listen in on, and it's kind of sharing what kind of results people are having in terms of getting articles in newspapers or out to the public. Sometimes they do go out to various events, like the Small Homes Council, or when we have the home show, that kind of a place, and set up a table to introduce people to CCL. I mean, the real agenda that I have at this point is trying to get a local group started so that we can start to have an impact with our local representative. And again, we don't necessarily expect everybody to immediately say, "Oh yeah, that's the greatest thing, since bread." But at least if you can start educating people and giving them the concept and turn them away from the immediate negative reaction that some people may have. We don't consider this to be a tax because we're refunding 100% of that money back to the public. And so it might make it easier for more conservative people that are, opposed to any kind of a tax increase. We feel like this is basically doesn't require a lot of government involvement to create this, that the taxes are based at the wellhead, the mine pit, or when it comes into the country. And so there are very few places that you're actually collecting money. And again, the objective is to give all that back to citizens so that mitigates any impact on their finances.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if we're collecting money on gasoline or natural gas, whatever you're using to heat and fuel your vehicles with, that impacts your pocketbook. But if you're getting a check back every month, that's going to mitigate that impact. There's no intention to refund money to companies who use an awful lot of energy. I worked for a company on the west side of Champaign that had 15 megawatts of power coming into that building. And so it encourages folks like that. And I know from trying to work there that they weren't particularly interested in energy conservation because that wasn't their business. They were there to make bottles, and saving energy dollars wasn't something they wanted to focus on or even consider, really. But because historically it's been said, well, it's going to escalate 5% a year, and in 20 years it's going to be 3 times as much as it is now or whatever, but it's never happened. And this provides a way to lay out for everybody involved what's going to happen to the cost of energy at a minimum.
You mentioned that you're interested in starting a chapter locally. Are there other people locally that you're working with already?
No, I haven't found anybody
Okay.
locally. I've talked to a few people, but I haven't found anybody that's excited about getting involved yet.
Mm-hmm. And then I just have one last thing. That is, I would be interested in a larger presentation. And one thing that could be interesting, if maybe if they can come out in the presentation. I don't know if you're prepared to talk about this now. I realize it's a national focus. And, I don't know that we're prepared to support it or that the city is prepared to get behind it. But in the event that we were to get behind it, that the city were to get behind it, what is is there a role for municipal engagement in something like this? So that would be one thing I might like to hear if, and maybe you have something to say about that right now.
Well, I know that people from communities have expressed support, but I'm not sure what that role is once you get into the organization and how they look at that. I'm sure they would be excited to have such support, but I don't know I don't know how to explain how they would approach that.
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
we'd have to wait for that presentation. We both learn something.
Great. Are there any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I'd just like to say I attended the briefing, I guess it was a month and a half ago, sometime before the holidays, that was made locally about this. I thought it was very well presented. This is a unique group. I'd say the two things that make it really distinctive is it, as I understood it, it's very volunteer-led, very much based on citizens doing this on their own time and on the merits. And the other is that it's a very specific proposal. It's
Yes.
So it's worked out in some detail. Sort of like a carbon tax, although it's a fee, and then the total benefits refunded sort of on a per capita basis that would offset a lot of the disproportional impact that rising energy prices have on some communities. And that structure has a lot of merit. The other thing is the fee, as he mentioned, would escalate over time. I think until such time as carbon use was reduced 80% or something like that.
I don't remember.
Yeah, but
Whether
it sets
there
it
was
on
an
a
endpoint.
schedule, on a clear trajectory that would send a real clear market signal. And so those two things combined, and again, I think it's set up really to people who do volunteer and become involved get training in how to become advocates. And
Exactly.
And it's all the instruction provided is looked very professional and very reasonable, so it would result in really effective citizen engagement and training and getting involved, which I thought was very laudatory too. So yeah, I would definitely welcome additional information here in the community, and I think this commission would be happy to, or I speak to myself, happy to help assist that happen in some public forum, whether that's here before us or somewhere else that makes the most sense, and we can talk about that offline.
Is there someone I should work with to determine what would be a good time, place?
I think Scott would probably be, because he's kind of the staff person who
Support.
helps coordinate all the communications with the,
Okay, great. And I do have a number of copies of these notes, which have my contact information as well as the information about the phone number that I'd be happy to leave.
Great,
with-
yeah, if you
with
could leave
Scott.
that, then we'll,
And it has my email address. I'm perfectly open to anybody contacting me at any time with any questions or anything that I can provide to help promote this.
speaking to us, and I'm looking forward to learning more about the group and the proposal.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Are there any other members of the public that would like to address us this evening? All right. Let's move on to the monthly staff report.
Good evening. First on the staff report, I'm happy to announce that Urbana has been advanced to the finalist round in the Georgetown University Energy Prize. We are among 50 communities, the only one in Illinois, who is competing for $5 million on the basis of energy efficiency. That's a 2-year competition, and there will be another whittling down to, I think, 5 or 10 communities, something like that, in about a year and a half. But we'll be, or maybe it's right at the end of the 2-year period, something like that. But we'll be in the competition for the next 2 years, working to improve energy efficiency. And just a reminder, we're working with in a, sort of a working group of community organizations that are putting this project together.
You said we're the only one in Illinois?
I believe so. I believe we're the only one in Illinois. In the packet, as an attachment, there is a 2-page document put together by the Regional Planning Commission. I had asked them to look at what I call electric vehicle charging station efficacy. And the question that I put forward to them was, at what distances do electric vehicle charging stations actually remove a barrier to buying and using an electric vehicle for commuting? And one of the premises of this is, if you live in town, well, regardless where you live, one of the premises is people will charge electric vehicles like they charge their mobile phones. They plug it in at night and charge it all night, and they get up and unplug it in the morning, and they drive all day. Plug all night, drive all day. 78% of American commuters have a 40-mile round-trip commute or less, and all the electric vehicles get at least a 40-mile range on one charge. So what that means is 78% of Americans can commute all week long on an EV without having to charge it, midday at their place of work or Starbucks or whatever it might be. So it's sort of a simple distance analysis, network street grid analysis that they did. And if you look at the map on that document, there are 3 color zones. The green zone is where someone can charge at home, drive all day, charge at home. The yellow zone is where someone could make their commute one way on an EV, but would have to have a charging station probably at their place of work to top off to be able to get home. And that's what I would conceive of as a zone where charging stations enable someone to commute with an EV who otherwise would not be able to. And then the red zone is where people are at such a distance that even if there was a charging station at their work, and let's say they only had a 40-mile capacity in their EV, they couldn't make it to work or back. The dots in the middle there are major employment centers, so that's sort of the destination in this analysis. So I thought that was really useful to be able to visualize that.
So does that presumes that their driving needs are only to get to work and not while at work, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's interesting to note that belt of where a charging station would actually enable someone to buy an EV where otherwise they couldn't is not in the city of Urbana, and it's also not really covering any population centers. So the number of people that, say, a new charging station at the university or one of the major hospitals, the impact it would have is fairly small in terms of enabling new people to be able to use an EV for commute.
I am curious, even though there aren't necessarily major population centers in that belt, just anecdotally, I know, in my time at the University of Illinois, there were, quite a few people, quite a few coworkers I know who, came in from out of town and I'm just curious with the methodology for this report, if they, was there any survey of the employers with regard to commuting distances, or, is that data available to the
No,
FEC in any?
the data that could be added to this, another layer of complexity, would be origin destination trip data from the census, and that's interesting and valuable. It's not a survey. It has some value to it. We could add that in, and that would give you a sense of how many people live perhaps in those yellow zones. Although I don't recall, maybe someone on the commission remembers, I think the trip data origin destination is by census block or something like that. And that wouldn't perfectly line up with the 3 zones that are in this analysis. But it's another layer.
That's true, and I think, given some of the comments about affordability of electric vehicles, there probably also needs to be another layer of those people. How many
Sure.
would come from households with that kind of spending power?
Sure, and when you start whittling down all these variables, you get to a really small number of people that you could induce to or remove a barrier to buy an electric vehicle.
So another thing, though, is that you're looking at what would remove a barrier, what would enable somebody to do it. And some of the discussion around electric vehicle charging stations is about encouraging it by providing sort of the field of dreams, right? If you build it, they will come kind of attitude. And it sounds like this particular review didn't get into that at all. It was purely the mathematical assessment. So
Correct.
I think that we just want to be careful not to assume that, not to take this result and say, well, therefore we don't need one, because there are additional benefits to having them outside of breaking down those barriers.
Sure. So there could potentially be a marketing or advertising value to putting a charging station in. I don't know of any evidence that says that helps. So Mitsubishi in a few cities did choose to put in 100 stations in a particular city. I don't know of any data that says that's increased EV uptake, and I think we can say anecdotally Mitsubishi as well as other car manufacturers have not followed suit. So I suspect that might indicate that they don't believe that there's a big advertising value to charging stations. If you think about how cars are normally sold, just imagine the last car commercial you saw. It's usually not a boring gray piece of equipment and then cut to the car, right? That's not usually how people sell cars. So I suspect that the advertising value might be low for just putting in technology, although I don't know for sure.
Are there other questions about the EV study? I did actually want to circle back briefly to the with the Georgetown University competition. As far as Urbana's participation in that, will this? I was just wondering about the relationship between competing and being in that competition and what we have in the Climate Action Plan. Is there, sort of an idea to maybe beef up what we already have in the Climate Action Plan with regard to this, or simply have additional programs, or does it seem like maybe what we already have in the plan is going to be enough to help?
Sure. So
move this along?
the activities that we've proposed in our application to Georgetown are 2. One is to and line up with the Climate Action Plan. There's a goal that says something to the effect of partner with existing community groups to increase or multiply impact, and so that's one of the things we're doing, and we're partnering with community groups to address energy efficiency in the residential sector. The other piece of our application for Georgetown, because they're looking at energy reductions in both the residential and the municipal sector. It's not required that you address both, but cities are allowed to address one, the other, or both. And so the other activity that's in our plan, in the Georgetown application and in our plan, is to evaluate opportunities to increase the amount of LED street lighting that Urbana employs. We've put in a lot of LED street lighting already, especially retrofitting parking lots. So the question is whether it's possible to speed that up and speed up that deployment.
Thank you.
I have a note here. I've had a very small project on my back burner for a couple of years. The Chicago Area Realtors Association several years ago amended their MLS system. That's the system that realtors use to track and advertise for sale properties. And they added a great number of environmental features and energy efficiency features that properties may have to the MLS system. So where you're looking at square footage and number of bathrooms, you can also see, is it Energy Star certified? Is it LEED certified? The Chicago one is quite extensive. It even goes into, I think, low flow or dual flush toilets and all kinds of more resource conserving fixtures. And so I've proposed just by phone and email to the Champaign County Realtors Association that they take a look at doing that here locally. I understand that there's a lot of data on those realtors sheets already, and so you're kind of competing for space. And so that's a consideration that they'll have to take up. But it's something we've made them aware of, that there are other associations doing this. I think we've talked before that the city building for Urbana is participating in the Illinois Green Office Challenge. When this staff report was published, we were in 3rd place in that challenge. It goes through April, I believe. I checked a couple days ago, and we've slipped to 4th place. But our green team is working on some activities, and we're going to try and get back to 3rd place. MTD has bumped us down to 4th and taken over 3rd. We've got a note. Staff gave some talks about recycling at Clark Lindsay Village. They've got a couple of new units. I can't remember exactly what the style is, townhouse or garden style. They're not apartments out there, and so that was an opportunity to engage with the residents there, the existing residents and the new residents, and talk to them about use cycle. We also gave a talk at an urban planning class recently about our sustainability planning and implementation efforts. We are also working with the Muhammad Aquifer Consortium and simultaneously Perry Research Institute staff on some activities for Fix a Leak Week. Fix a Leak Week is an EPA-sponsored annual event, and it's an opportunity to highlight and promote water conservation, particularly a really easy, cheap way to conserve water just by fixing leaky toilets and faucets and so forth. So one of the activities that we're working on is engaging with Lowe's Home Improvement Store to put on a little demonstration of how to fix a leaky toilet. It's cheap, it's easy enough that pretty much anyone can do it, but if you've never done it before or never seen someone do it, it could seem a little intimidating. So we think removing that intimidation barrier with a simple demonstration could be valuable.
So if Lowe's, I don't know if that's a work in progress or if they've agreed to do it, but if somebody had the ability to fund flyers about that a couple weeks ahead of time, from the bicycle advocacy work I've done in the past, I understand that Papa John's and maybe other pizza places are willing to stick it on the top of the pizza boxes as long as you give them the flyer. So maybe you could look into
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Because somebody has to print them, and you give them to them, and they'll give them to all the pizza boxes.
So yeah, you
Pizza
give them
buyers.
the pad of stickies, and they
Yeah.
great.
I think it can be, I don't think it has to be a sticky. I think it can just be loose sheet. They have the little glue dots or something.
I think I was at a meeting where they were talking about this at the Muhammad Aquifer Consortium meeting last week or 2 weeks ago. They've already got flyers, but that's a good idea about where to put them. But they're like a 1-page, double-sided, shows you how to do it and what you need. And they've talked with Lowe's, and they've agreed to do this. So it's
The printing.
No, to do the
The
actual
event.
in-store demonstration, but
Because schools also, if you get it to the school early enough, they'll send it home to the parents. But it's probably 2 weeks early. What week is the event?
I
March
believe it's
17th?
yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds right. Yeah. Another exciting announcement, Urbana has been awarded the 2014 EPA WasteWise Local Government Partner of the Year. That's an award for our recycling and composting and waste diversion efforts. We're a participant in WasteWise through their online tracking system called ReTrack. And we use that to measure our year-on-year performance. And we had some fairly substantial reductions in, or increases, I guess, in the amount of materials recycled, reused, or composted this last year. So that's exciting. There's a couple of other big names that are also getting WasteWise awards in other categories that we've got listed there. So we're in good company. Our next meeting will be March 3rd at 7 p.m. in Council Chambers.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments for Scott? All right. We do not have any continuing business on the agenda this evening, so let's move to new business and the draft green procurement policy.
So I thought I'd describe kind of the overarching structure and goals of this policy, and then take any questions that you might have on the particular items. So the overarching idea is the city makes a lot of purchases, and the city has goals to reduce energy consumption, reduce waste generation, conserve water. And so if we can do those things in part through our purchasing, we should do that. Essentially reducing our environmental impact through purchasing products that have a lower environmental impact themselves. So the overall structure of this policy is that it would apply to city government, City of Urbana purchases. It starts from general and then moves to specific. So it starts with a stipulation that when we're purchasing whatever it might be, say pens, if there is some third-party environmental label, or if such a product is available with recycled content, we should choose the environmental version, environmentally friendly version of the product. From there, those general stipulations get down to more specifics about certain types of products. There's also a cost control element in this policy. So the policy says when you're buying items, choose the environmentally friendly version within a cost premium of X%. And I think right now I've written in 10%. But whatever that extra percentage is, whatever it's determined to be by administration, is sort of representing our willingness to pay. It's how much more are we willing to pay above, say, the cheapest version of the product to get the recycled content or organic or whatever it might be. And that percentage can be set at any particular level that administration chooses, and it could be easily changed. So that's the overall structure, and be happy to take any questions or recommendations you may have on individual items.
For the percentage, what is the process for that? Would that end up going through city council voting, something like that? Or is that a administrative policy that, when you say administration,
Sure.
I don't know what you mean exactly. And why not start with 25%?
There are a number of purchasing policies that are not ordinances. They're at the administrative policy level. And so I anticipate that this would also be considered at the administrative policy level. It doesn't violate any existing ordinances.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
You've done a cost estimate. What is 10% of the city's procurement expenditures for the categories of items?
I don't have it with me, but I did take all of our office supply line items for one particular year, and I added up everything we spent and then also what the total amount budgeted for those were. And an extra 10%, I don't remember what the number was, but it was still less than what we had total budgeted. So it should be very feasible. Let's imagine for a moment that it was more than what we had budgeted. Then we just simply move that 10% to 5%, or 1%, or 25%, whatever it might be. It's fine. You can fine tune it that way.
Just the reason I said 25 is because you're not talking about a 25% premium on every single product. Some of the products you might find are actually cheaper for more sustainable. So one-off 25% could come out to 10% total.
Correct. So
where it was coming from.
if we take this policy as is and implement it tomorrow, or say next budget year, we're not automatically going to be spending 10% more. Because like you said, some products are a little bit more expensive, some really aren't.
Sorry. Can I ask another question? Are you going to accept any third-party certification of a product as green?
So we've got a list of third-party certifications in here. One of the advantages of having this be an administrative level policy is if we find that an existing third-party certification really seems not credible, it's easy to remove it from our list. And vice versa, if there is a third-party certification that's not in the list that we find is available for the types of products we purchase and does seem credible, we can add it to the list pretty easily. I would say we started with I think these are all very serious third-party certifications. It's a big list though, so we're including a lot of different types of products.
Other questions or comments?
So I know this could be, procurement. There's a lot of different kinds of things that you can buy, and so you might not want to be writing a book. But when I was looking over the list, I energy efficiency background, and so as I was looking at the list, it seems like there could be more. And I've done a little bit of research on just model procurement policies. I imagine you have as well. And there's some pretty good guidance on energy efficient procurement policy. And actually there was one I'd like to put up on the screen. It's the Federal Energy Management Program. And anyways, I'll pull that up. But I think it gives some good information that you don't have to write it. You can pull it from Department of Energy, basically. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
So I have a question. I wasn't clear if you were saying that the LEED certification would be new buildings would be LEED certified or would meet those requirements. And it was a little quick for me, and I don't have it in front of me, but
Sure. Let me, if someone can.
it kind of ties back to the energy also.
Number
while
5.
you pull
Okay.
that up.
So what it says for facilities is new City of Urbana facilities construction shall specify registration for and pursuit of a LEED certified or a Passive House certified building where the building is expected to be occupied normal business hours, so not a warehouse, and design is expected to exceed 1,500 square feet, not a shack, of heated and cooled space, provided any net additional construction costs for pursuing LEED has a payback period under 10 years based on predicted operational savings. So that particular one has a very specific type of cost control in it.
So but that's LEED certified because they're certified and then the different levels. So
Oh,
not
sure.
a level? Or
Yeah, I'm
just-
not, yeah,
It could be just the certified,
correct.
not silver.
As
gold.
is written now, LEED certified, LEED silver, LEED gold, whatever LEED certification
And
level
the
would be.
requirement is just any certified.
Correct. And it also allows passive house certification as well.
That's good.
Todd's pulling that up. I had a couple questions on a couple of the items. And they basically have to do where you specified a couple classes of chemicals like flame retardants, and then there's a long list of chemicals. So that's flame retardants is number 6, and number 18 is toxic chemicals. I was just curious where the source, what is there a model language that you're drawing from?
Yeah.
And are these currently not banned? Are there some legal status at EPA? Where does this grouping of chemicals come from?
I think these are all currently legal. There's 2 lists that I'm referencing to compile this. One is a prohibited chemicals list for purchasing that is in use for the Orange County, Florida Convention Center. I used to do some work with them, so I was familiar with that. Another one, and I can double check this, I think it is the Washington State Department of Ecology, something to that effect, also has a prohibited chemicals list or a recommended prohibited chemicals list. So those 2 lists together is how I've compiled this. One of the things we're doing is we're sharing this with all of the departments in the city. So if, for instance, fleet management uses a brake cleaning product that has chlorobenzene and they really need that one, there's no replacement for it, then they tell us and we just take it off the list. That's a compromise, the effectiveness of a product versus the safety of the product or environmental impacts of the product. But if there's products, for instance, flame retardants, that there doesn't seem to be really good non-chlorinated flame retardants for fire safety folks. So we're just not going to have that apply to the work they do until there is.
So I couldn't get that particular website. I was looking at it just a little bit earlier tonight, and I couldn't get it to work here. But basically, it's a database, and I could share it with you later. It's a database of specifications and procurement guidelines that is authored by Department of Energy, Federal Energy Management Program, and so this is actually a procurement mandate for federal agencies, and so there's guidance on, there's lots of pages, but there's things like, for commercial style equipment and residential style equipment, there's air source heat pumps, chillers, boilers, small air conditioning units, compact fluorescent lights, servers, data centers, light fixtures, fluorescent ballasts, water heaters, all of that kind of stuff. And when you click on it, it gives you the procurement language and some of the technical specifications. And so, as far as a procurement policy document, maybe it's something as simple as referencing a source rather than having this unwieldy thing. But one thing that's kind of nice is that you can. I guess it would be nice for if you have a procurement policy. It's nice to call out specifically the categories of products that you've done that already. But if when we want to talk about energy efficiency, especially around buildings, if you can call out specific types of product categories like lighting or motors or all these kinds of things, so you can kind of pick and choose what you think applies to the equipment that the city has. So sorry I couldn't get that to work, but I can share it offline.
Sure.
Todd, does that policy apply to things beyond equipment, or is it pure, does it get into the pens and furniture or whatever they might also be buying?
No,
or is it's really
doesn't.
the equipment side of
So
the energy consumers?
This particular is energy efficient product procurement. And so as opposed to, there's lots of other models of energy or environmentally preferable purchasing. I think that's one tagline, or green, like with what we have drafted right here. So
So it's specific for a section of the document.
right.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it if you'd share that with me. I might have looked at it a long time ago. I don't immediately recall it. In looking at a lot of green procurement policies across the country, there was a couple things I wanted to avoid. Some of them that I've seen, essentially, what they do is recommend that you do a life cycle assessment on your product. That's just not going to happen. No one's going to do a life cycle assessment on every pen or paper clip that they buy. Now, the tool you're talking about might be really valuable if we're able to plan ahead for, say, a chiller replacement, and we're going to replace it before it fails on some sort of schedule. Then we have time to really kind of dig in and weigh a lot of the different features of an appliance. On the other hand, if a boiler fails in this building in the winter or a chiller fails in this building in the summer, that sort of time isn't going to be possible. And someone could say, is it Energy Star or not? Yes, it is. Okay, I'll take the Energy Star one. That sort of level of green purchasing is possible in that scenario. It's my hope that these policies will slowly make their way into sort of normal practice. Not everyone buys a fraction of the types of products that are addressed in this policy. Facilities management doesn't really buy pens and paper clips, but they buy, building mechanical systems. So they'll learn that piece of this, and they won't really even have to reference it. Office supply purchasers will just come to know, okay, this is the type of paper or the type of pen I'm looking for. People in our office like this pen, and it's 70% recycled content. So now I'm just switching my habit from this pen to that pen. And so I think that's how I envision this being implemented. Rather than every single purchase, we have to sort of sift through this policy to do anything. That's what I'm hoping.
And I'm sorry, again, I don't have it in front of me, but did you include something about the freight, like SmartWay transportation requirements? Is that in there?
For fleet vehicle purchases.
For fleet vehicle purchases?
Yeah, there's an EPA designation program called SmartWay.
Mm-hmm. SmartWay applies also for just general shipping, I believe.
They may have something for that too, yeah. I haven't touched on that, and I'm not familiar with it, so if you want to share.
I can share some information
Yeah.
about it. I don't have it with me, but I'll get it to you.
I was curious, and there are, I guess, a handful of these items where it mentions, certain, like percentage of recycled content or a certain score on a scale. How did you select the cutoff?
So I selected those cutoffs based on what was readily available and would meet our needs, and would also selected on the basis of kind of graduations or plateaus in price. So I think recycled content paper is set at like 30% or 35% or something like that. If you look at the pricing, if you go any amount above that in terms of recycled content, the price really jumps. So if we can get 30% for not much more money, to me that's a reasonable place to set the bar. I think you mentioned, we're maybe referencing some of the scores for vehicles. In really digging into EPA's Green Vehicle Selector, or whatever they call their tool for the SmartWay vehicles, we found that there was a lot of vehicle types that we really need in our fleet that score quite poorly, or didn't meet the SmartWay label. So that's why there's a fallback to the two scores that make up the SmartWay label. And so looking at, say, the newest version of an existing fleet vehicle that we have, and just sort of pegged at where that existing vehicle newest version would be. Now, in that sense, some of the vehicles we're not pushing forward in terms of energy efficiency, but we are putting a floor right at where we're currently standing. It can be particularly challenging if we were to take some of these vehicles and try and increase the fuel economy by those sort of jumps into the Smart Way label. Again, we could really dig in and get precise about miles per gallon per cubic inches of storage space and all that kind of thing. But now, there's a cost benefit of opportunity cost. How much research are we going to do for each purchase in order to maximize, a little bit more, squeeze a little bit more greenness out of our product? So that's the balance I'm trying to strike.
I was also wondering about the, because there's a couple places we have exemptions that it's pretty clear immediately why they're there. I wasn't sure what there's in item number 13 about the single-use plastic bags. There was an exemption, so I was just curious what the story was with that one.
So cities don't buy a lot of plastic bags that most people would be offended by. One of the purchases that you will see is for events and promotions. And so cutting that out was what I was envisioning. One of the exemptions that's in the, for example, there is called Whirlpack. It's a water sampling plastic bag with a particular type of enclosure. A lot of the language in here I wrote years ago when I was in an office that had a small lab. So that was one of the exemptions that was relevant to us. But the idea is, the police may have a particular type of plastic bag that they use for evidence collection. I don't want to take that out of their toolkit. It's really some unnecessary, what we might imagine are unnecessary plastic bag uses. Also, garbage can liners. We don't want to take that out of our existing procedures.
And on item 17, that sounded like that one is, that's kind of an absolute regardless of cost. Is that right?
Yes. And the reason for that is if a particular battery use, so it's based on whether it's appropriate for the use, if a particular battery use is appropriate for rechargeable batteries, then on a life cycle basis, rechargeable batteries are obviously cheaper. So rechargeable batteries cost 3 times as much to purchase, but they last 50, 100 times longer, because you recharge them. So they're obviously cheaper as long as they work for that use. So an example, there are applications where a battery needs to hold a charge, have a very slow discharge, just say an indicator light in some emergency device. It has been found that is often not a good use for rechargeable batteries. They don't perform well in that situation. So in that situation, the rechargeable battery requirement is just exempted. But in, say, handheld devices that are used every day, rechargeable batteries are a great option. And instead of buying single-use batteries 10 times in the course of a year, you would buy rechargeable batteries once every 2 years. So it's a pretty clear savings.
Do you know, do rechargeable batteries work in parking meters?
I do not. It's a great question.
I recently found out, I guess it's maybe something you just don't think about, but all those parking meters, when it's electronic, it has a battery in it. And it's an issue.
Good question.
For the, paragraph 20 on the cost premiums, I was not sure I quite understood. So the allowed cost premiums in this regulation shall not be compounded in the process of making a purchasing
Mhm.
decision. Does that just mean if it's both recycled content and chlorine-free, you can't go 20% over? You can only- Okay. And I just had one more question, which was, I just wondered if maybe some of the reporting, in item 23 could be shared with SAC?
Sure. So I've talked to a couple of cities and counties that have green procurement policies, and they all agree that reporting is very difficult and always incomplete. Part of the reason for that is there are many different people from many different budgets in many different offices, all making purchases. The best hope we have of getting a good idea of how we're doing implementing the policy and what kind of, say, dollar impact we're having on green purchasing is by working with vendors and getting an annual fiscal year, end of fiscal year report. And so that's something that we've already started to talk to our office supply vendor for.
Great.
But again, that's still going to be incomplete. In the course of a year, we buy from many different vendors. Some of them we're only going to buy from once ever in that company's history. Some of them don't have sophisticated computer systems where they could export a report to us. So office supplies through a vendor report is going to be probably as good as it's going to get. Theoretically, you could have every single purchaser go to a completely separate file and log every green purchase, but that's probably not worth the time to get the data. Again, in the future, city computing systems may be such that all of that may be captured in a purchasing system, but that's also not where we are at today. So the language for reporting is kind of vague. Essentially, it says try.
Are there other questions or comments for Scott? All right. Well, this, I think, it strikes me as being a well thought out document, and, there are obviously a lot of considerations to balance, and strikes me as, doing a good job of balancing all those different competing priorities. That is all we have for new business. Do we have any announcements? Looks like we've got one for Boneyard Creek.
Yeah, the Boneyard Creek project has an open invitation to submit names. So if you want to name the park after a friend or yourself, it's open on the website. You can do that. I encourage people to submit lots of ideas.
Great. Any other announcements? All right. Well, seeing no further business before us, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Well, I think that's everybody, so I guess there won't be any nays. All right. We are adjourned.